Hello everybody, welcome to the Wild Ginger Running YouTube channel, live broadcast and podcast. Today we are talking all about ankle injuries, the risks, the prevention, some strengths moves with Anklelicious Amazeballs coach and physio, Tim Pigott from HP3 Coaching. How are you today,
Hi, Claire.
Tim?
Yeah, your intros get more and more random, but yeah, good stuff.
More and more ludicrous, that's how we like it.
Something like that.
Right, well, we're going to be talking all about ankle injuries today, so that you hopefully, if you've got one, you can rehab it, and if you get one, if you get one, you can rehab it, but if you haven't got one, you don't get one. So. But first of all, we're going to do a thank you to the sponsor of the episode, NAC Sports Nutrition. So I've been doing, amazingly, regular strength training recently, and I'm using their gels to fuel that high intensity exercise. And as with the NAC bars, the energy drinks and the recovery powders, they aren't too sickly and sweet. So they slip down really easily, and I actually do recommend these gels. So make your order using code WILDGingerRunning for 15% off at uk.nac.com. So, ankle injury, Tim. So I see ankle injury flagged up as a really common one, or a really common fear that new trail and ultra runners have. But like in your experience or any research that you have done in the past, how big really is the risk of ankle injury to trail and ultra runners?
I mean, ankle sprains are the most common injury that we're going to get in terms of musculoskeletal injuries. So, it is right up there in terms of the likelihood of getting it. And sort of there was a study out quite recently which has somewhat prompted this conversation, and showing that in runners the risk of getting an ankle injury can be anything up to sort of 67% of the running population. So this is a lot of us are it's one of those where if you haven't sprained your ankles, the chances are you're going to sprain your ankle.
Oh no.
That's where the sort of odds are sitting. And the sort of studies that have been looking at this in runners have looked at sort of all sorts of different running sports, including sort of more like court sports like basketball and volleyball and netball and so on and so forth. But I suppose the bias of your listeners and listeners to this are going to be more the kind of trail and off-road. So again, the kind of studies looking at more like cross-country runners, orienteers, so more applicable to us, is again the risk of an ankle sprain is going up even higher. So this is why it's an important topic for us to think about. And then, I mean, with all injuries, the likelihood of getting an injury is increased if you've had that injury in the past. With ankle sprains, this is then classified as potentially moving into chronic ankle instability. So if you go over on your ankle once, you're more likely to go over on it again, you go over on again, more likely to go on again, and so on and so on and so on. And then we can end up with an ankle that's really unstable, and that's where we end up with more sort of long-term problems. And that can be down to either kind of mechanical damage, so tearing of ligaments or stretching of ligaments, or more kind of motor control, so the muscles aren't firing well, the brain isn't aware of where that foot is in space, the posh phrase for that being proprioception. So we need to look at this from a number of different angles, really. And I think the common approach for dealing with a sprained ankle is obviously let the initial swelling to settle down. You maybe do some simple range of motion exercises. You maybe get some elastic TheraBand stuff out. You maybe do some balancing, just standing on one leg. If you think you're being clever, you might stand on a wobbly thing, wobble board or cushion, to try and make your ankle work a bit harder. And then you just get back into running, and then you're off again. But what we know is the risk of then going over the ankle again is increased for anything up to about 9 months post that initial injury. So unless you fully rehab that ankle, the chances are you're going to go over it again. And that's where we run the risk of moving into this kind of chronic ankle instability world.
Yeah.
So I suppose what we want to think about then is, how do we stop that happening? Yeah. So either kind of how do we stop this happening in the first place, or the chances are, probably the majority of the people listening to this have rolled their ankles maybe at least once.
Yeah, I
So
have.
it's about, yeah, exactly. And I have many times.
Yeah.
So it's one of those.
I did it when I had been doing a photo shoot for Trail Running magazine. It was back in 2011, and I remember this because the Dragon's Back race first took place in 2012, and it happened again when I was collecting signs in for that race. But I'd been running like along these really precarious little tricky slopes, like all day, and then just walking back to the next photo shoot area, I just managed to just really randomly just fall over for some reason, like trip over something or go down the side of a slope, just walking down it on my left ankle, and it really, really hurt, like really hurt, like to the point where couldn't even walk, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to run for weeks. And it did get better quite quickly, but then it, like you said, with this chronic ankle injury thing, it just, every time that I went over on it even slightly at a later stage, like for the next sort of half year to a year, it really hurt again. Like I was collecting signs in, as I said, for the Dragon's Back race, and I managed to go over on it on some uneven, grassy, mossy stuff, and it really hurt. And I was just like, oh my goodness, my ankle's now weakened forever. But it's fine now. But actually, it's not fine now. I don't trust it as much. My brain doesn't trust that ankle as much. I used to fly down hills, but now it's got a limit, that ankle. And it doesn't feel like I own the foot. Like I can't feel the foot as much. So yeah, I didn't do any like proper rehab. I just did that whole, like you said, wobble board, rolled up towel, scrunching the ankle, just walked a lot really. So yeah, I didn't rehab it properly. So maybe I should start now. Is it too late to do that now?
No, it's not too late, but it's something that you've got to work on. And what you just said there about, not really trusting the ankle, not quite sort of knowing where it is in space. See, that's essentially the damage to the proprioception. So the awareness of, what angle the foot is at, how much tension's going through the ligaments, how much tension's going through the tendons. That's what your brain's using to know exactly where the foot is, and therefore how to adjust it and correct it in space. So yeah, that's certainly something that we need to think about as part of the rehab or prehab, prevention of the injury happening. And you mentioned something else really interesting there, which was that you'd kind of done all the really technical running bit, and then it happened on sort of really quite mundane ground.
Yeah.
And again, that's often what happens is, it's maybe towards the end of a run, or you're not really paying attention because you're paying really good attention on the technical ground.
Yeah.
And then you're just running along nice even ground, maybe just even going on the pavement, and because you're not really paying attention, that's where you then catch an edge, catch your toe, roll over the ankle because you're not quite paying attention.
Yeah, we've just had a live comment from Maria Knutson. She says, I'm okay on the trails, and then I roll my ankle on the way back to the car. How important?
Exactly.
And she says, how important is it to put a bandage on the ankle ASAP? Oh.
Yeah, okay. So, all right, well, let's think about that. So if we start with, you've just rolled your ankle, you've just sprained your ankle. So we think about the initial management of that. So yeah, compression is part of it. People might be familiar with the kind of RICE or PRICE kind of protection, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Bless you.
Excuse me.
However, we don't follow that anymore. So we don't use the RICE, we don't use PRICE or any of those acronyms. The latest one we use is peace and love.
Oh.
But let's not go too far
nice.
down that route at the moment. So yeah, get a bandage on it, compression bandage, strap it up. That's going to minimize any kind of excessive swelling, certainly. And it's also going to help minimize the risk of you then stretching it by rolling over on the ankle again. Let's say you've done your initial rehab and we're starting to get back running again. Then yes, as I've already mentioned, you're at greater risk of going over on your ankle again for anything up to 9 months. So as you start to transition back onto maybe the trails, you need to try and give your foot some protection. So again, bandage, strapping. So we may want to use some strapping. So maybe that's the kind of zinc tape, Luca tape, that kind of non-stretchy to really give yourself some good protection.
Or and that could just wear a walking boot.
It could be.
running in your walking boots.
Yeah, sort of shoes or footwear with a bit more ankle support, certainly. Also, maybe a wider platform. So again, nothing sort of too high stack or too narrow, where again, you're more likely to roll your ankle. So maybe something with a slightly lower profile, so lower stack height, wider base to give you that stability. If you struggle with tape, you can use ankle braces. So more rigid braces or very tight straps to, again, give yourself that little bit of extra support and protection. So those are things you can certainly think about there. But yeah, as sorry, was it Maria that put the question in? So as Maria said, if you just rolled your ankle, then yeah, get a compression sock on, get a compression bandage on immediately. Yes, that's kind of what you want to be working on. And then it's thinking about the initial maybe kind of management, and that's going to then flow through to kind of longer term prevention of injuries. So yes, it's making sure that you get full range of motion back out of that ankle, because again, if you've got too little mobility in the ankle, then that can actually put you at greater risk, because you're not able to kind of mold your foot to the ground. So then you end up sort of molding onto an edge rather than be able to let your foot mold to the ground. So we need to make sure you've got good mobility through the forefoot. So that might be where you're doing, rolling your foot over a massage ball, golf ball, getting good mobility through the front of the foot. But then also making sure you've got good mobility through the hind foot, so through the heel bone and the ankle joint itself. So that, like I say, you're not too stiff when you're hitting the ground and can't then mold and adapt to the surfaces underneath you. But of course, the flip side to that is if you're too flexible and not able to control that, then again, that becomes a problem. So it's kind of working out where you sit on that spectrum. Are you too flexible, in which case we need to do lots of strengthening work to almost stiffen you up a little bit? Or is it actually too stiff, in which case you've got to do some mobility work? So whether that's doing some additional kind of foam rollering, stretching, self-mobilization with bands, these type of things to get that movement back into the ankle. And then the next obvious thing is thinking about the balance, the proprioception. So as we've already touched on, you said about not quite being aware of where my foot is, not really quite trusting where that foot is. So that's your brain using those nerve endings in the joint, in the ligaments, in the tendons, and using that information to know exactly where your foot is, what angle it is at, etc., etc. Now, the problem is when you sprain your ankle, you damage some of those nerve endings and that communication. So your brain's not 100% sure how to balance on that foot. Now, your balance is made up of more than just those sensors coming from your tendons and your joints, ligaments. It's also your eyesight. So by just looking at things, you know where your head is in space and therefore out of balance. And it's also those semicircular canals in your ears. So how that fluid is moving around in your ears is then, again, telling your brain how to balance and how to stabilize. So I'm sure we've all done that thing where you stand on one leg, close your eyes, and you go all wobbly because you've taken away one of those stabilizing mechanisms. So, of course, if you then damaged your ankle as well, so your brain's not getting good information from your ankle, and then you take away your eyesight, you're obviously going to be wobbling around all over the place. And that's highlighting that really those signals coming from the ankle are not as good as they should be.
Yeah.
So very commonly, kind of rehab will consist of standing on one leg and closing your eyes. However, does that actually replicate what we do in real life? How often are we actually needing to stand on one leg with our eyes shut? Not really real life, is it?
No.
So what we want to be doing is probably more the emphasis on challenging the vestibular system with the kind of moving the head around to challenge those semicircular canals in your ears. Because again, I'm sure people could relate to this, is, I was running along, but then I turned to look over my shoulder and bang, I rolled my ankle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Turned to talk to my friend, bang, rolled my ankle. Something like that. And it's because of that change in head position, again, they're not able to be fully aware of what's happening at the ankle. Boom, that's when we go over on it. Yeah. So that probably wants to be a bigger part of our initial balance training, is yes, standing on one leg. Once you can do that, is challenge yourself more with then looking in one direction. Can you balance moving your head, looking over your left shoulder, your right shoulder, looking up, looking down, and then playing with the angles of that. So kind of going on the diagonals. So, looking up and left, down and right, up and right, down and left, these type of things. So basically moving your head around in all sorts of different directions, challenging those ears, and therefore can your brain still stabilize at the ankle?
Yeah.
And then again, people will often move on to doing things like standing on a wobble board or a wobble cushion or balance pad, things like that, which is all well and good for making it difficult. But how often are we running on very soft, squidgy ground? Or how often are we running on ground which is potentially wobbling and moving around underneath us? Maybe you could argue running across bogs. Yeah, okay. Maybe running down a scree field where the stones are kind of moving underneath us. Yeah, okay, I can get behind that. But for most of us, the ground is fairly stable when we stand on it. Mm-hmm. But what it isn't is necessarily flat.
Yeah.
So it's at an angle in some way, shape or form. So it's angling to the left, it's angling to the right, it's angling down, it's angling back, and all variations in between.
Yeah.
So that's where it's then useful to then practice your balancing on one leg, but on a wedge. So then you can kind of challenge your ankle. So you're fine standing when your foot is essentially at 90 degrees flat. But what happens when your foot is tilted to the left and you still balance? What happens when it's tilted to the right? When it's down, when it's back? Kind of play around with all those different angles, and how well can you balance like that?
So how would you make a wedge? Would you just like fold up a towel and have one end higher than the other?
You could do. I use a yoga wedge, so you can get sort of like actual wedges. Thing. Yeah, just like a foam wedge, so you can use that. They're fairly cheap to get hold of. You could use a book and then sort of angled up on another book if you wanted to do something like that. Obviously, we can get creative. There are specific products out there if you wanted to buy a specific product. Like I say, the yoga wedges are found are the sort of cheapest version of achieving this.
Yeah.
So that's where we want to then think about challenging it next. And then obviously you can combine that with what happens when my foot lands at a certain angle and I'm looking one way or I'm looking another way. Because again, if we think about trail running, we're often moving our eyes, moving our head around as we're kind of looking around the trail, because we're needing to maybe move around, obstacles, adjusting our position on the trail, things like that.
Yeah.
So we've got to get used to that type of head movement.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because like immediately when you think of ankle rehab or prehab, you go to wobble boards, rolled up towels, standing on one leg, closing the eyes, that kind of thing. And I've written that in various magazines and things over the years, but never have I come across a wedge. So yeah, this is one instance where a wedgie is a good thing.
Indeed. And that's it. I mean, what you've said about you've written in the past is not wrong.
Yeah, it's just not the most helpful
but
thing.
It could be better.
Oh,
and I think that's where we need to kind of challenge ourselves. So then it's thinking about strength. So again, one of the things that often happens when we sprain our ankle is, yes, we'll often maybe injure the ligaments. If you're really unlucky, you maybe even sort of pull a bit of the bone away as well, so you can get a bit of an avulsion fracture.
Ouch.
But the other thing is you're potentially going to be stretching the muscles. So we've got the muscles that obviously pull the ankle out to the side or pull it in. So you've got the mostly it's your sort of perineal muscles on the outside of your shin that will pull the foot back around. So usually, spraining your ankle is your foot kind of rolls underneath you. You need strong muscles to pull it back around again. So again, the very classic is, you get your TheraBand out and you do some exercises where you're pushing your foot out against that band and strengthening it up. And yeah, as a sort of starting point, that's reasonable, that's logical. But we need to think about the forces that are involved. So when your foot is hitting that ground, and maybe as we're running and you're running down a hill or something like that, we could be talking about needing to absorb multiples of your body weight in terms of force. So if you're thinking about a bit of coloured TheraBand and how strong that is, the argument is that really strong enough for what we need? So then it's looking at, moving into more sort of body weight exercises. So again, onto that wedge and challenging yourself in different positions. That might be where you get your wobble cushion out. And again, you're having to work those muscles a lot harder to stabilize. Fair enough. It might be then practicing sort of walking in different ways. So there's the classic routines, the kind of 6-way walk. So walking on your tiptoes, walking on your heel, walking on the outside edge of your foot. So you're kind of lifting the inside edge up. So as if you're about to roll over your ankle, but you try and hold and stabilize it there. Walking on the inside edge of your ankle, walking with your toes turned out, walking with your toes turned in. So all these are kind of different positions. And then you can do the same thing, but loaded. So doing that, walking up and down, but holding some dumbbells or kettlebells or something like that to, again, load up and strengthen that foot in lots of different positions.
So this is all like rehab after, but can this all be prehab as well? Like,
absolutely.
Would this be what you'd be suggesting for prehab as well? Like if you've never even had an ankle injury, but you're just a bit worried about your ankle strength. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there's both. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Exactly that.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that people often miss in their rehab and prehab is we do all this kind of standing on one leg balancing. Fine. We do maybe some of the strength exercises with the TheraBand or so on and so forth. But these are all very slow, controlled movements. When do we sprain our ankle? Largely when it's kind of landing on the ground. We need fast reaction times. So this is where our plyometrics come in. So it's then starting to progress back into doing your pogos. You're bouncing on 2 feet. So imagine you've got a skipping rope, doing it on 1 foot, doing it in different positions. So kind of forward, backwards, side to side, hopping forward, backwards, side to side, diagonals, all these kind of things. And then it's going back to our wedge again. Because again, when do we sprain our ankle? Is when we land our foot on a slight angle, can't react quick enough, bang, roll over it. So let's get back on our wedge again. Hopping on one leg on a wedge in different positions. Where do you find that challenging? And practice your plyometrics, your pogos on a wedge in different positions. Because then again, that's starting to replicate what we actually do on the trail, but in a more controlled environment, and building your confidence up that, oh yes, I can now do it in this position at this angle, and I trust my ankle to cope with it. And we strengthen those muscles in those different lengths. So if you think about, if you're pointing your toes and your foot's kind of turned underneath you as if you're about to sprain your ankle, and you're on a wedge and you hop up and down on that, then the muscle on the outside of your shin there is in a kind of lengthened stretch position. So how strong is it in that position? Because again, what maybe more traditional rehab protocols might be is you get strong in a very neutral position. And you might be strong there, but as soon as you move out of that neutral position, you're not strong. And that's why you then go over it again. So again, it's that classic of, somebody comes into my clinic, I did all my rehab, I did all my balance, I did all my strength, I went for that run, and bang, it went over again. And it's like, well, yeah, you're strong here, but you're weak in that position because we didn't get you strong enough there. So that's kind of what we need to work on.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And like, when would you do those exercises? Would you do those for like 10 minutes before you go out for a run? Or would this be something not to build onto either side of a run or on a different day altogether? Like, when are we talking? Because we don't want to like tire them out before we go on a run.
Exactly.
But then if they're tired after the run, then maybe that's not so good either. Which way round would you recommend?
Exactly that. So some of this is going to be fatigue. So again, you mentioned about, at the end of your run, or Maria mentioned about, she's done a run on the trails, walking back to the car, bang, that's when she goes over on it. So again, some of this is going to be a fatigue issue, and some of that's going to be neural fatigue. So just the nerves are essentially tired out, not firing quick enough, not reacting quick enough. So some of what we've just been talking about up until now is maybe more separate rehab or prehab as part of maybe your gym routine. but it might be you just do a little bit prior to your run, almost just to kind of wake things up a little bit. And that's more just making you more aware of what you're doing and thinking about your ankle, so you're more conscious. Because again, simply being aware of it, you'll be more stable, which is how some of the taping techniques work. You know, the tape itself doesn't necessarily give you any structural support, but it just, because it's pulling on the skin and you feel that, you're more aware of it, so you pay attention and you concentrate a bit more.
Like a sort of a placebo-y feeling-y effect.
Yeah, and placebos work even when you know it's a placebo.
Excellent. And when you're doing these exercises, like maybe if you've got 5 minutes before your run and you're doing the bit on the wedge, would you'd wear shoes, would you? Because you're aiming to do these whilst you're wearing shoes and get strong for wearing shoes, or would you recommend doing them in bare feet?
Again, variable. So that's the other thing is, you know, we need to build these into life. And as kind of trail and ultra runners, which is mostly who we're talking to today, you know, we're busy, we're trying to do a lot of training, and trying to add yet another thing into the diary is often challenging. So this is where you want to kind of use that stacking or sort of scaffolding this onto an existing habit. So what else do you do in life where we can be doing our ankle strengthening exercises? The obvious ones I get everyone to do is when you're brushing your teeth, you do your ankle rehab. So, you know, you stand on one leg whilst you brush your teeth. Yes, I have a wobble cushion in that, you know, I've been maybe kind of downplaying or criticizing wobble cushions, but they do have their place. You know, I've got a little wobble cushion in my bathroom, so while I'm brushing my teeth, I stand on my wobble cushion and make my ankles work that way. So, you know, before you know it, you're doing 3 minutes in the morning, 3 minutes in the evening, you're keeping the dentist happy and the physio happy, or your coach happy. So, you know, that's one thing you can be doing. Standing waiting for the kettle to boil while you're making a brew, do some ankle exercises. Just walking around the kitchen whilst you're making dinner, walk in that sort of funny way I mentioned, the kind of 6-way walk, you know, walking on your tiptoes in the kitchen, walk on your heels, walk on the outside edge of your foot, walk on the inside edge of the foot. You might get some funny looks from your family or housemates or whatever, but you know, that's just a way you can build it into life.
And what do you think about walking, like standing desks and walking walking pad treadmills? Because I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm standing. I've got a standing desk now, and I'm currently, because of the rolled up towel business, I'm just sort of like gently padding around on my jumper, because otherwise I find like I'm just standing on one leg all the time, like leaning at a bar sort of thing. So I've been consciously trying to sort of do the funny walks under the desk, but I know I'm just wobbling about a bit. But yeah, like you could do that in a meeting, couldn't you? If you were on Zoom and, you know, if you're not giving a presentation at the time, you could get on the wedge.
Oh, I do it anyway.
Yeah, well, I would too, but it depends what sort of industry you work in. Like we work in the sports and outdoor industry, so everyone's like, do whatever you want.
But my university colleagues are well used to me kind of dialing into Teams meetings, and I'm either on the bike or on the treadmill.
Yeah, you're on the bike or running. Yeah, well, that's fair enough in our industries. But what about a walking treadmill? Because I haven't bought my walking treadmill yet, but I really want to, because I'm very aware of I'm just standing. I don't think that's great for the ankles. It doesn't do anything. It's just standing. So I would like to buy a walking pad. Do you have a walking pad, or like any recommendations?
I don't. I'll admit it is something that I've thought about. I just haven't got round to doing it. In terms of, you know, what we're talking about for, you know, ankle stability, I'm not aware of anything where they've been used. There is the kind of joke of the trail runner's treadmill, which is you've got the treadmill base and then it's covered with rocks and sticks and so on and so forth. So yeah, not sure about that one, but yeah, certainly, you know, goodness me, if you kind of scroll back many years of my Instagram, you'll see sort of pictures of me at a standing desk, again on a wedge, on a wobble cushion, things like that. So yeah, you know, I've incorporated that into just working at a standing desk in the past. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just I mean, the point is look at aspects of your life where you could just build this in without even needing to think about it. So yes, if you do have a standing desk, keep a wedge, or again, a little sort of soft foam pad or cushion or something. And when you are standing up working away, well, just practice. Can I stand on one leg and tap away on the keyboard? Can I stand on one leg at an angle and tap away on the keyboard, or do other bits and pieces?
Yeah.
So you just build it into everyday life. Yes, of course, you could incorporate that into a little bit of your warm-up routine, and that's where obviously some plyometrics, just some hopping, jumping, skipping, is all very useful as part of your pre-run warm-up anyway. But again, that all fits into what we're talking about here regarding, yes, you're doing that to build that stiffness and that spring to improve your running economy, but oh yeah, bonus, I might also be improving my ankle stability as well. Great.
Yeah, build it into things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I suppose there's the other sort of adjuncts. I've mentioned about taping your ankles and using sort of the classical, what we call stirrup taping, just again up both sides of the ankle to give you that stability. If needed, you can obviously do more complex taping techniques. I have actually got a brief YouTube video. Maybe I'll give you a link. You can stick that in the comments section later on. How to tape up your ankle before going for a run.
Yeah.
And do that yourself. Obviously, if you're needing more advice, go and see a physio or physical therapist, somebody who can then teach you and show you how to tape your ankles yourself. As I mentioned, you might need to get an ankle brace, which is, again, give you that stability, particularly if you find that taping irritates your skin. Braces are quite bulky, though. So again, a lot of kind of trail runners don't like that because of the kind of pressure on your ankles for that reason. And then some of the other things. So I work with another company, Compex, who do kind of electrical stimulators and various other medical devices. But I use their Compex device, their neuromuscular electrical stimulator, to again fire up those muscles. So you can use that as another way of artificially firing those muscles. But we're doing some research at the moment because, as I mentioned, it's that speed of contraction which is often lacking post-injury. So we do all the slow stuff, fine.
Yeah. But
it can often be quite difficult to get that speed of contraction and speed of reaction back. Mm-hmm. So we can get really strong, but as soon as the ankle moves too quickly because we land at an unexpected angle, we just can't control it because we can't fire the muscles as quickly. And that's where using some sort of muscle stimulators can be useful for really firing up those fast twitch fibers artificially initially to kind of relearn how to fire your muscles super quick. So that's another sort of additional
avenue.
Adjunct.
Yeah.
Particularly if you are struggling. So maybe that's a deeper conversation, but sort of incorporating Compex into people's training programs. But I suppose if somebody has been struggling with chronic ankle instability and you're thinking, but I've done all the stuff the physio has told me to do, I've done all these exercises and I still roll my ankles. Maybe that's something that'd be worth exploring.
Yeah, definitely. And we've got a question about that on the live chat, which is very relevant. Maria first of all says the wedge is going to be our new bestie. I put that up earlier, so it won't let me put it up again. A string. I can't remember his real name. What's your real name, String? Is it Chris? He's a returning member of our patronage. So String, because I was walking like this, he said he thought I was desperate for a wee. So, no, I went before the broadcast. I'm not a total amateur. But Stephen Hopkins has got a great question here. A couple of questions. He said he's been plagued with an ankle injury from March. Oh goodness me. Physio thinks it's two tendons rubbing around the outside, but pain is spread all around. Hyperflex / extend is agony, but pressing thumb around ankle doesn't hurt. And then he's now at a loss as shockwave and ultrasound is not making a difference. So that's and he's been stuck for months now just doing rehab exercises. Any other suggestions? It sounds rubbish, Stephen.
Yeah.
What do you say,
so what
Dr.
you can
Tim?
So when you stretch the perineal tendons, so the tendons kind of rubbing around the outside, the sort of back outside edge of the ankle.
Ooh.
That knobbly bit on the outside of the ankle. So those tendons are kind of held down with essentially another kind of ligament. Let's call it a ligament. And if they've then been stretched, then the tendons can end up kind of almost flicking up and over. So I wonder if that's what he's referring to.
Well,
and yeah, those tendons then sort of rubbing through the sheath there. So we're saying about those sort of two tendons rubbing, then yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then it's really looking at, why are they so tight and why are they rubbing? So it's probably working higher up, up into the muscles themselves, up to the knee there. There are, I would maybe be looking at using some taping techniques to kind of try and pull those tendons away from the bone. So kind of pulling away from the lateral malleoli if that's where the rubbing is taking place. But yeah, if it's something that's sort of continuing on and there's still that maybe scarring and adhesions between those tendons and that sheath, and if you haven't gone beyond the physio, then that might be the time to go and see a sports doc, because it might be that you need something a little bit more invasive to help try and get those tendons sliding through that sheath again. So that's where, do you need more like sort of injection therapy to try and do something around there? But again, I'm slightly guessing based on that information you're given.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a case of been going on since March, still getting problems. If you feel you've done all the rehab, then that's the time to kind of step it up. Potentially, if you haven't had imaging, get some imaging done. So probably ultrasound as ultrasound scan as the first port of call. Maybe then also an MRI scan. But yeah, maybe get yourself in with a sports doc and get that assessed in greater detail.
Ah, thank you, Tim. I hope that helps you, Stephen. It does sound like really horrible not to be able to run since March and have so much pain. So yeah, thanks, Tim. Hope he gets that sorted.
Yeah, I've done that. I've had that happen before. So again, where I've broken my left leg and I've got a whole bunch of scarring and things not quite being in the right place, I've had that where again the tendons start flicking around and it is horrible. So yeah, if that is what you're dealing with, I feel for you, but yeah, I managed to fix mine. I'm sure you'll fix yours, and I've had numerous people over the years come through clinic with that, and it is fixable. But yeah, it takes a long time, and it is very easy to upset the tendons again.
Yes.
Sorry, my calendar's pinging away in the background. And just quit that.
Oh, I thought it might be mine.
No.
So, Tim, you've got loads of resources at HP3 Coaching. Should we give some links to people in the film description in the podcast show notes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you got like some ankle injury? You mentioned the taping up the ankle thing. We'll link to that.
Yes.
But are there any sort of ankle strengthening sessions that you've got on there that we want to put on the Wild Ginger Running HP3 Coaching
Yeah,
link?
certainly. So, I mean, on my website, hp3.co.uk, if you go to the resources section, there's a strength and conditioning library there, and that's where I've got sort of various videos from myself and from Morgan, our S&C coach. So again, you can have a look on that. There's various ankle proprioception, balance exercises, mobility exercises. Apologies, I had closed my calendar down and it's still pinging away.
We can't hear it, don't worry.
Oh, well, that's all right then. Maybe it's just me. So there's lots of resources on there. Yes, and they kind of link through to my YouTube channel. So again, you can have a look at various things there. My YouTube channel is not as organised as yours. It's just a kind of a random dumping ground of content.
All you have to do is put it in playlists as a body parts playlist, and then it'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. One day I'll get round to organising that.
Yeah. Well, if people are
I need a media manager.
Yeah. I don't have time, but otherwise, yes.
No.
But like all people have to do is access it via what you're sending them, so it doesn't matter if it's not searchable properly online.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I can give you some links to that. That's not a problem.
Yeah, and some things that like some little training plans, like ankle strengthening plans, people can buy from you on Training Peaks, because I'm sure everybody wants to support HP3 Coaching and all all the amazing chats that you do for us. And Stephen wants to say thank you as well. He says, thanks again, Tim and Claire, much appreciated. I'll make sure to contact the GP. So hope that all sorts itself out for you, Stephen. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about ankle injury, Tim? I know we need to keep this one short today. It's coming up for 40 minutes. So yes, we've got 5 minutes if you want it.
I think we sort of covered the key points there, really. I suppose the message to get across there is prevention and rehabilitation is multifaceted, and you've got to think about all these different aspects. It is about the range of motion, the mobility of the ankle. It is about your balance, or proprioception, if you want to give it the posh word. It is about your basic strength, but it's also your rapid reaction, the plyometrics. There are things you can add in terms of the adjuncts, in terms of taping and bracing. It's thinking about your footwear as well. So I suppose that is something we've not touched on really, is footwear, isn't it? So the ankle is more unstable when your toes are pointed. So in other words, high heels. I can't relate to this. I'm sure you can, Claire, but walking around in high heels, how stable are you?
Oh, awful. I look like a transvestite if I wear high heels, because I just cannot walk in them. For many years now. I was glad to turn 30 because I was like, no, I'm not wearing heels anymore. Shoes with a higher drop, so a bigger difference between the heel and the toes. So if you're talking kind of these shoes with maybe sort of 9mm drops or even higher, are going to be putting your ankle at a greater risk of going over on it, spraining it. Okay, so sort of like
whereas
less
obviously
drop is better.
Less drop, the flatter your foot is, the more stable it is, because we kind of close the joint down, we make it more stable. I mean, you can try it yourself. If you point your toes, how much can you move your foot in and out? Versus if you pull the toes up to your shins and then try and turn your foot in and out, how much does it move?
Oh yeah, loads.
Less. Yeah.
And it's harder to stabilize yourself when you're just on your tiptoes.
Exactly. So, if you are somebody that's chronically unstable in your ankles, you're going to be wanting to try and find a shoe which is of a lower drop. Now, does that mean you need to go as far as 0 drop? Again, that's debatable in terms of obviously the increased stress on your Achilles and your calf and things like that. So it may not be going as far as 0 drop, but it certainly might be looking at going more to kind of 4 or maybe 6mm drop if you're traditionally running in sort of a higher drop shoe. It's looking at the width of the shoe as well. Is it a very stable platform? The stack height of the shoe as well. So it's not just the heel toe drop, but has it got loads and loads of cushioning? And again, so if you're higher off the ground, again, that can make it harder to stabilize. You might want to be looking for something which has got a lower stack height, get you closer to the ground, and therefore easier to stabilize. Is looking at the grip of the shoe as well. How much are you trusting the grip on those shoes when you're off road? Because again, if there's any slipping and sliding of the shoe, again, that's going to challenge you more and maybe more likely to go over on it. So those are just some different things you want to be thinking about there.
Yeah, a multifaceted approach for sure. Well, that has been super useful, Tim. We've got lots of people saying thank you as well. Like Tadeusz is saying, I will try out the head movements on one leg to add to my routine. Thank you very much. And Chris says, fascinating. Thank you both. So I think we've helped a lot of people, and
good stuff.
Once it goes out on the podcast, it'll help a lot more people as well. So just before we go, thanks to NAC Sports Nutrition for sponsoring the live broadcast and podcast, and I am looking forward to eating more of the bars, especially the waffles and the new gels on my next run. If you want to try some, use code WILDGingerRunning for 15% off at uk.nac.com. So just remind us how we can follow you, Tim, and how we can get in touch if we would like some physio and coaching from you.
So Instagram's the kind of social media side of things. So Tim Pigott, HP3 on Instagram, or the website hp-3.co.uk, and there's various resources and information on there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Maria says, great info today. Stephen Hopkins says, great session again. Really appreciate it. All the best. So it's great that we could help out so many people today. And thank you very much, Tim. It's always great to chat to you.
Good to see you, Claire. Yeah, cheers.
Cool. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.